Now, I hope that we have shown you, from the governance perspective, ethical life and economic life can be defined with different level of priority between the ruling body and the common people. However, that is under the assumption that there's a conflict exists between economic life and ethics. In other words, we have assumed that achieving one thing makes it difficult to achieve the other, and we have to choose. Well, in the short term, yes, that could be right. But over the medium and longer term, there is in fact extreme harmony between the two. So in the second part of the lecture, we'll examine the theory of the harmony between ethics and economics. We say that real profit is, in fact, righteousness. I think the first response when we hear the statement is to interpret it as something of a metaphorical nature with the function of dissuasion. However, it is not metaphorical at all. It is a rectification of the mistaken common perception about righteousness and profit. Not only the modern perception makes a sharp distinction between profit and justice, it was also the case in Confucius' time as well. According to Confucianism, in the long term, profit and righteousness are the same thing. They're simply expressed in different terms. This concept of unification between righteousness and profit is much better explained by the law of causality in Buddhism. In Buddhism, the law of causality refers to the interaction between cause and consequence. It's the fundamental truth of the universe. So, with respect to wealth generation, the law of causality says that the wealth is the final effect or consequence, whereas giving is the cause. Now, such an action of giving is generated from the heart of righteousness. So righteousness is not only a recommendation or voluntary code of best conduct, but it is a fundamental source of wealth generation. In fact, causality education is so important, it forms a large part of Buddhist education, as well as Christianity, Islam, and many other religious education. Now, understanding the principle and working mechanism of the law of causality will take some time. So, in the reading list, I recommend the book called Liao Fan's 4 Lessons. What we can say now is that this book is the crown jewel for learning the law of causality and the rule of wealth creation. So basically, is the family teachings written by Mr. Liao Fan Yuan in China around 1600 AD. The book describes in details through making great efforts to perform good deeds, how Mr. Liao Fan Yuan changed his fate and acquire social status, children, longevity, and all of which he was not supposed to have. So I'll leave this to you as your reading task. Very interesting book, and very practical too. Now, coming back to the to Confucius' teaching on righteousness and wealth. So it is a fact that the people and the ruling class generally care for profit and wealth. That's true, instead of justice and virtue. So for this reason, although they are the same thing at the end, Confucius didn't talk to the ruling class about profit, but talked justice and righteousness instead. If Confucius only said to them that the justice is good, and didn't say that justice is profit, they probably wouldn't believe him. So they wouldn't practice justice as a result. Therefore, Confucius pointed out very clearly that justice is real profit, and focusing only on immediate profit is a suicidal policy. The relationship between righteousness and wealth is very direct. Although the Great Learnings it doesn't explicitly mention the law of causality, it does illustrate this principle using country governance. As you can see, it says that the superior man will first take pain about his own virtue. Virtue is the root, wealth is the result. And this is the motto that we use at the front page of this website. So this is equivalent to saying virtue is the cause and wealth is the natural consequence. It also says, if he makes the root his secondary object and the result his primary, he will only wrangle with his people and teach them rapine. Hence, the accumulation of wealth is the way to scatter the people, and the letting it be scattered among them is a way to collect the people. So this shows the importance of getting the right order of things. Now, from the perspective of the government, it is important to be, financially sufficient. However, if the ruling body set wealth as its primary objective, it is likely that it will compete with the people and eventually result in mounting complaint. In contrast, people will be loyal to the government when the government's economic policies focus on the well-being of the people. In ancient times, this could take the simple form of tax deduction. Now, throughout the history, social prosperity has been closely related to the lowering of people's tax burden. This includes the period of tax reduction by Guanzi of the state of Qi during the spring and autumn period. Also, the beginning of the Han Dynasty when the agricultural tax was reduced by almost 90%. Also, the prosperity of the early Qing Dynasty was also resulted from a series of policies that, return wealth back to the people in the form of tax reduction. But of course, the system of public finance is much more complicated nowadays. And taking tax as an example, government's tax income must be redeployed in many areas of people's life, including public health care, infrastructure spending, national security, etc. So by no means are we suggesting a simple tax cut as the only way to realize government virtue. In fact, a reduction in tax income from a tax cut can be reclaimed from other charges and fees. So we're not playing with number game here. However, ladies and gentlemen, the fundamental idea is that financial policy should be driven by righteousness. For instance, let me ask you, should the government spend taxpayers' money on foreign warfare or making an atomic bomb? Now, according to the number provided by CNBC, each B-6112 atomic bomb that goes through a life extensions program will cost $20 million. One W-80 warhead undergoing similar program will cost about $75 million. In contrast, the global average of spending per student per year to educate a pupil from primary through tertiary education is around $10,000. So the cost to maintain each B-6112 atomic bomb is equivalent to supporting 200 pupils for 10 years. And this number for a W-80 warhead is 750 pupils. The number is even more striking when we look at low-income families. According to Dr. Lisbeth Gronlund, the senior scientist and co-director of the UCS Global Security Program, in a 2013 report, she estimated that if the US made modest reduction in its deployed and reserve arsenal for a total of 3,000 nuclear weapons, the money needed for this operation would be equal to 30 years of federal funding for all children at 2012 enrollment levels taking part in what is called the Head Start program. Now, what is this program? Well, this program provides comprehensive early childhood education, healthcare, nutrition, and parent involvement services to low-income children and their families. Well, we know that how the government spends taxpayers' money is never an easy question. Everything costs money. So it makes it even more relevant to address the question, what is the best for the people? What would a benevolent government do with people's money? The Great Learning continues to say that wealth gotten by improper ways will take its departure by the same. The virtuous ruler, by means of his wealth, makes himself more distinguished. The vicious ruler accumulates wealth at the expense of his life. So this, clearly echoes the law of causality. Wealth must be generated in a proper way, otherwise we'll find ourselves losing control over it. Now, originally this paragraph is a recommendation made to the ruling class. However, it is universally applicable. These days, it is true that we don't see, modern government financially exploiting the people. We don't see that. And almost all government set economic development as its primary objective. So we may think that this paragraph is no longer relevant to our life. But think again. If we consider the basic economic concept of consumption, now let's ask ourselves this question. What is the maximum amount that one should consume, or one can consume? The answer is quite clear and easy, right? It is equivalent to the amount of savings. Most of the time, we can't consume all we've got, right? We have to save up for a rainy day. So that's why we have to smoothen our consumption pattern, regardless of the fluctuation in our income level. So what happens when we consume beyond our savings? Well, we could, but someone will have to pay for it. And, either people in other countries or future generations. If that's not possible, then at some point, we'll have to pay it back ourselves. The housing market crash in 2007-2008 financial crisis cannot be a better example of this principle. Now, to cut the story short, before the market crashed, people who were able to borrow mortgages many times beyond their payback capability ended up losing everything when the credit market froze. But despite of a low interest rate environment and easy credit back in the days, with the benefit of hindsight, the mortgage market simply didn't follow the natural order of things. A man simply cannot live a life that he cannot afford. Okay, so what does that have to do with righteousness? Well, everything. The mortgage lending increased not because of more secured future income of borrowers, no, but simply because of some accounting manipulation called off-balance sheet financing and securitization. So banks and credit agents, they didn't have to worry about the credit quality of the borrowers, but only have to worry about how much fees they could make by trading these securitization derivatives. Borrowers' protection is out of the question, as well as righteousness. So look, guys, righteousness means a lot of things. When it comes to lending mortgages, it means responsibility to the borrowers. When it comes to trading these mortgage-backed security derivatives, traders would have to think about the origin of these products and the motivation of the originators. But if none of these is taken into a consideration, and wealth is accumulated in improper ways, then it will take its departure by the same. Meanwhile, the government that is involved in the creation of this madness clearly has to spend more money to fix the damage, and not to say the reputation. The Great Learning concludes this principle by saying the following: Never has there been a case of the sovereign loving benevolence and the people not loving righteousness. Never has there been a case where the people have loved righteousness and the affairs of the sovereign have not been carried to completion. And never has there been a case where the wealth in such a state collected in the treasuries and arsenals didn't continue in the sovereign's possession. So this paragraph means that when the government sets righteousness as its guiding principle, the people will do the same. And when the country follows the guidance of righteousness, wealth will be sufficient. So in future lectures, we'll discuss Confucius' principle of consumption, production, and distribution in more detail. And all of these are based on the principle of righteousness and human nature. In the Great Learning, it is recognized that wealth of the nation comes from the people, and more specifically, people's dedication to their occupation. Now, this so-called wealth is not only represented by material sufficiency, but also mental happiness. Dedication to their work and life is the external representation, but inside there must be a sense of justice and righteousness in the mind of the people. So to achieve righteousness in people, the leaders and ruling body must demonstrate their righteousness first. They must act first. And they must put the real benefit of the people as a priority. So all in all, righteousness of the government is the root, and or the cause in the language of causality, and the wealth of nation is the result, or we can call it the effect. Now, earlier we have discussed the dual character of ethics, and we have shown you that the priority of government itself should be ethical cultivation. This does not deny the priority of government objective of improving people's livelihood. In fact, as we have discussed before, economic development forms the basis of both politics and a human society itself. The ethical cultivation is a very personal thing. No matter what occupation a person does, cultivation of righteousness is fundamental to both personal development and success of career. So this is why the ultimate source of wealth and profit is righteousness. In other words, doing business is great, but doing it right is more important. That's the personal level. And on the government level, the personal ethical requirement of the commander-in-chief will manifest into the level of justice of government itself. The final paragraph of the Great Learning illustrates this point using a negative example. It says, when he who presides over a state or family makes his revenue his chief business, he must be under the influence of some mean, small people. He may consider this man to be good, but when such a person is employed in the administration of a state or family, calamities from heaven and injuries from men will befall it together. And though a good man will take his place, he will not be able to remedy the evil. This illustrates again the saying, in a state, gain is not to be considered prosperity, but its prosperity will be found in righteousness.